And welcome back. I'm very pleased to have on the line with us Professor Peter Wadhams. He's a professor of ocean physics, head of the Polar Ocean Physics Group at the Department of Applied Mathematics and Theoretical Physics at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. And you've written about an ice-free Arctic, the possibility, you predicted, the data has indicated that within the next few years, the Arctic will be completely ice-free for the first time in over 100,000 years. What are the consequences of that, the people on this planet?
Well, there's a whole series of consequences, which are all, unfortunately, rather serious. Firstly, the retreat of the sea ice, or the loss of the summer sea ice, will mean that global warming will increase because you're changing a large area of white to dark. So you're reducing the average albedo of the planet, and that will mean that it's absorbing more radiation in summer through having a big area of open water in the Arctic. And that means that global warming will accelerate. New processes are coming into play. I think that's the thing that's most worrying, that as well as the feedback processes that were happening that related to our carbon emissions, we're now having extra feedbacks from the changes that the warming has itself produced. So we find, for instance, that the warming of the Arctic, the loss of ice from the Arctic, then leads on to accelerated warming because of albedo, to accelerated sea level rise, and to possible methane burst that will itself cause accelerated warming. So already an analysis that was done at Scripps Institute of Oceanography showed that just the retreat of sea ice is equivalent to adding a quarter to the amount of carbon dioxide that we release into the atmosphere. And if you add the snowline retreat, it makes it half. So what we're doing, every 2 molecules of carbon dioxide we put into the atmosphere, we get another free extra molecule added from these feedbacks. And on this, there's kind of a spectrum of folks speaking about these issues. On one far end, you've got folks like Guy McPherson who are saying, okay, we're all going to die in 100 years, and not from biological I mean, the planet's going to die. And so just, get ready to say goodbye because it's gone too far. And then on the other hand, you've got people, who even continue to deny that climate change is happening at all. What's, in terms of risks, where are we really at right now? Well, in terms of risks, I'm afraid we're more towards the McPherson's end, but I don't think we need to despair the way he does. The reason is that we can, I feel like many people do, that the idea of reducing carbon emissions as vigorously as we can, it obviously has to be done, but it's kind of hopeless that this will solve our problems. If the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we need to stay below 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees of warming, we're just not going to make that by reducing carbon dioxide emissions alone, because they're so built into our society and even the fabric of our cities and our civilization. We depend on fossil fuels, and we can reduce them, and we can take a lot of steps to reduce the emission of them, but it will take time and it will be much slower than anybody thinks. So in that sense, it looks as if we're doomed. But there are 2 things we can do where the kind of native skills and intelligence of especially of Americans could really come and save us. There's a sort of a go-go approach that's needed here, and that's geoengineering and carbon drawdown. These are the 2 things. We have to take carbon out of the atmosphere. We can't just try to reduce the emission of it, because we've already got too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So if we can put a sticking plaster on it by geoengineering methods like marine cloud brightening, which I personally like because you're putting water vapor into clouds, which is a harmless thing to do, as opposed to putting powders into the stratosphere, that can slow global warming. But to actually bring it to a halt and give us a future, you have to design and devise ways of air capture of carbon dioxide, ways of taking carbon dioxide directly out of the atmosphere and putting it somewhere where it can't, when it's out, where it's out of the system. And that's a technical problem, and it can be solved. You need a project of the scale of the Manhattan Project, but it's the future of the planet. So it's something which ought to be done, and I think people should come to realize that that's the thing that has to be done. We can't mess around with halfway things like reducing our carbon dioxide emissions, because we're just not going to do it. We can say we'll do it, and what politicians can say they'll do it, and they'll with their hands on their hearts, but they won't do it, and we won't do it, not fast enough. But carbon dioxide, taking it out of the atmosphere, whether it's by these sort of artificial trees or whatever idea, should be vigorously pursued, and that's what's needed to save us, to actually bring the carbon dioxide level down. That's the only thing that ultimately will keep us going. So that should be our main research effort in science, I think.
And by save us, are you talking about, the end of a habitable planet for humans?
Yes, I am, really, because it's a kind of a perfect sort of perfect storm of bad things is going on because of the exponential increases of all the bad things. So population still increasing exponentially, food supply can only increase to a certain level because of we've only got one Earth. We're increasing our with all the increasing of emissions, we're warming our climate rapidly. There's a lots of, and we're running out of water. Wherever you see changes, they're always going in the wrong direction. And the only way to bring them to a halt is to actually stop the climate warming. And without that, we'll come against the buffers somewhere, either in warfare or lack of water, lack of food. Something will bring about a collapse or rise of sea level, which could bring about an economic collapse. Or we'll come up against something that will bring us down as a society if we don't work to actually stop the warming going on.
Right. The world could be heading toward a hothouse state despite our current efforts to manage global warming, reveals a new paper in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Joining me now via Skype from Louds Island in Maine is Professor Catherine Richardson, co-author of Trajectories of the Earth System in the Anthropocene. Explain risks that would still exist even if the world abided by the Paris Agreement on a 2 degrees centigrade rise in temperature.
Well, what we did is we sort of said, well, listen, it's nice that politicians have decided that the Earth will be 2 degrees warmer than it was in the pre-industrial, and sort of assume that it'll just stay at that temperature. But we look back at the Earth's history, and it turns out it's never had a stable period of a long period where the temperature was stable at about 2 degrees above pre-industrial.
Our planet relies on a series of mechanisms that help it maintain a balance amid the current trend of global warming. For instance, Earth's oceans, trees, and soil soak up about half of the 40 billion tons of CO2 we release into the atmosphere every year through the burning of fossil fuels. But these natural feedback mechanisms could soon turn against us in a matter of a few decades if the CO2 emissions continue on their current rate and the planet reaches a certain temperature threshold.
So what that told us is that there may be other processes in the Earth system that when you get to be 2 degrees warmer could keep pushing the temperature up until you got around 4 to 5 degrees, as has happened in the past.
We got some rather dire news recently that global carbon emissions increased by about 3% in 2018, or projected increase by about 3% in 2018. And this is on top of an increase of about 2% in 2017.
After several years of decline, carbon dioxide emissions in the U.S. are on the rise.
This big increase in emissions was driven primarily by China, which saw a 4.5% increase, but also by the United States, which after many years of declining emissions saw a 2.5% increase in our emissions. The United States is a bit of a complicated case because despite the fact that our emissions increased this year, we also had a banner year for coal retirements and reduction in coal generation. And the electricity sector U.S. emissions were down. But the reason why U.S. emissions increased overall this year was primarily due to the combination of an unusually cold winter in some parts of the country and a very hot summer, both of which drove up energy use relative to previous years.